Ahoy there! It's a vessel from the desert coasts of Rahadoum. The Man's Promise has a crew of veteran Rahadoumi sailors, but they won't easily escape. Chase the vessel down and prepare to board. There's plunder to be had. Ahoy, me hearties, and welcome to another Pathfinder Adventure Card Game, Skull and Shackles. This week, Jarell and Lyrion have been joined by the goblin Ranzak, and will be taking on Cat and Mouse. The villain of this scenario is Rahadoumi Captain. The henchmen are buccaneers. During this encounter, when you would encounter a buccaneer henchman, summon and encounter the ship Man's Promise instead. If you would defeat the Man's Promise, the buccaneer is defeated. Otherwise, the buccaneer is undefeated, and a random character summons and encounters the henchman Hammerhead Shark. The locations this week are Holy Isle. If you play a blessing during your exploration, you may explore again. Fog Bank. After you play a card or use a power that examines cards in this location deck, shuffle it. The Shipwreck Graveyard. At the start of your turn, succeed at a Wisdom or Survival 5 check, or your ship is dealt 1d4 structural damage. Tempest K. If your ship is dealt structural damage, increase the damage by 1. Cannibal Isle. After you reset your hand, bury an ally. As I mentioned, Ranzak, the male goblin raider, is joining the party, and he's a promo card, so I thought he would be a fun addition. He has a decent dexterity, and has both the skills Disable and Stealth. His constitution is also good with a d12, and he has fortitude. And he does have survival, but it's only 3 added to a d4. He has a hand size of 7, so he has lots of cards out at any given time. He's proficient with light armors and weapons, and his powers read, if there is another character at your location, you may evade a Bane. A random other character at your location encounters it instead. Add 1d4 to your check to acquire a boon, and when you acquire a boon on your turn, roll 1d6. On a 4, 5, or 6, explore your location. So he should be pretty good at exploring locations, getting through cards, and probably will end up sticking with either Jarell or Lyrion. The ship for this episode is Shackles' pirate ship. When commanding this ship, if your check to defeat a ship has the swashbuckling trait, you may discard a card from the blessings deck to add a 1d12 to that check. Jarell's going to start at the Shipwreck Graveyard. Ranzak and Lyrion will start at the Holy Isle. So the Shipwreck Graveyard, Jarell has to make this check at the beginning of her turn. Succeed at a Wisdom or Survival 5 check, or your ship is dealt 1d4 structural damage. For her, that's a d8 plus 3. And she gets a 5, plus 3 is 8, so she succeeds at that, and no damage will occur. And for her first exploration, she finds a rum bottle, which is an item. Check to acquire Constitution Fortitude 7, or Craft 5. Discard this card to choose a character at your location, and add 1d10 to that character's check to acquire an ally that has the pirate trait. You can also banish this card to defeat a barrier that has the task trait. Well, her Constitution Fortitude check is going to be a d6 plus 3 to get a 7. And we get a 5, so we do acquire the rum bottle. We will recharge the boatswain to examine the top card of the location deck. And it is the buccaneer, which is the henchman for this scenario. So on her next turn, she will be able to encounter the buccaneer and hopefully close the location. Over to Ranzak, and I just want to read you the poem that he has, or a song, I suppose, on the back of his token card. Goblins fight and goblins bleed. Ranzak takes what Ranzak needs. Follow orders, don't give guff. Fight for Ranzak, he needs stuff. Ranzak wrote this clever verse. Ranzak's smart, so you go first. Come on, pirates, do your duty. Ranzak's ready for some booty. And on his first exploration, he encounters the Blessing of Abadar. Dexterity Disable 6 or Divine 5. Well, he has a Dexterity Disable of a D10 plus 1. And he only gets a 4, so he doesn't get to acquire the Blessing of Abadar. We're not going to use any blessings to explore yet, so we'll pass play to Lyrion. And it is a barrier. Hull damage. Intelligence Craft 6. The difficulty to defeat this barrier is increased by the adventure deck number of the current scenario, if any, so it's actually a 7. If defeated, your ship is repaired. If undefeated, your ship is dealt 1d4 structural damage, and you must banish 1 random plunder card. Well, we definitely want to beat this. Her intelligence is a d6, so we're going to need to spend a blessing to beat this. She has a blessing, so it'll be 2d6 to get a 7. And that wasn't such a great idea, was it? So we ended up getting a 5, which is not enough. So now we have to roll 1d4 for structural damage. And we get 2. Now, since Jarell is at another location, I'm not sure her power works. Reduce structural damage to your ship by 1. I'm going to assume it doesn't because we're on the ship here, but she's not on the same ship because she's at a different location. Lyrion and Ranzak are going to have to discard a card in order to cover that damage, so we'll do that with the pistol. And we must banish 1 random plunder card. Well, we've only got 1. This will be banished. Not a good turn for Lyrion, so she will reset back to Jarell. And it is the Buccaneer. So the scenario reads that if we would encounter a Buccaneer, then we actually will summon and encounter Man's Promise. So we have the Man's Promise ship here. Check to defeat Wisdom Survival 6 or Charisma Diplomacy 8. When encountering the ship, if any check to defeat the Man's Promise has the Swashbuckling trait, add 2 to it. Well, we don't have the Swashbuckling trait. She will use a Blessing of the Gods to give her 2 dice for her survival check. 2d8 plus 3. And she easily beats that. There would have been a plunder card, so we'll roll on the plunder table, and that's just a d6. And a 6 means that we can choose any one of the card types. Since it's Jarell who's encountering and her preferred type is ally, I'm going to take an ally out. So now we do have a plunder card. Now we've defeated the ship, which means we've defeated the Buccaneer, so we may immediately attempt to close the location. And to close the shipwreck graveyard, roll on the plunder table, then summon and acquire a random card of that type. So that'll be another d6. And this time we get a 3, which is armor. And it is magic wooden armor, Constitution Fortitude 3. For her, that is a d6 plus 3, so she automatically acquires this card, which closes the location. On closing, your ship is dealt 1d4 structural damage. So we have to roll a d4. I hope it's not a 4, but it was. She can reduce it by 1. So each of them will discard 1 card. That takes 4 damage, so now the ship's not wrecked. And that's the first location closed, so that's good. Going back to Ranzak. And he encounters a dolphin, which is an ally. Check to acquire Wisdom Survival 8. Well, he has a d4 plus 3. So he can't get an 8 without using a blessing. And I don't think it's worth it. So we'll just let that go back to the box. He will now reset his hand back up to 7 cards. And play will move to Lyrion. She encounters a Blessing of Pharasma. Intelligence Arcane Divine 5. For her, that's just a d6. And she gets a 5, so she does acquire the Blessing of Pharasma, and she will discard that to explore again. And it's a Blessing of the Gods, which she will acquire immediately. She will discard that to explore again. And it is a Crocodile. Combat 13. If the check to defeat has the cold trait, add 1d6 to it. If undefeated, shuffle this card into a random open location if it came from one. Lyrion will use her Dragon Pistol, her Dexterity or Range skill, plus 1d6, and additionally bury this card to add another 2d6, but she'll use her bury power on a different card, the Lookout. So she's rolling a d8 plus 3d6 plus 4. And we get a 17 plus 4, so we've defeated the Crocodile. She will reset her hand. Jarell will move over to Cannibal Isle. At this location, after you reset your hand, bury an ally. Well, she doesn't have any allies in hand right now, so that's okay. And she encounters an ally, the Carver, Charisma Diplomacy 6. Now, she has a d8 Charisma. And she gets a 6, so she does acquire the Carver. We can discard this card to explore your location and add the Swashbuckling trait to the combat checks during that exploration, which we might as well do because we'd have to bury her due to the location effect anyway. And it is the villain, Rahadoumi Captain. Combat 12. Before you act, recharge a card that has the Pirate or Swashbuckling trait if you have one, then summon and encounter the ship Man's Promise. The difficulty of the check to defeat the ship Man's Promise is increased by the number of characters at your location. Well, that's interesting. Let's first see about the Swashbuckling trait. Yeah, we do have the Cutlass out. We also have the Cat and Nine Tails and the Wooden Armor. Let's recharge the Wooden Armor. I'd rather keep my options open for weapons. And now we need to encounter Man's Promise. Difficulty is increased by just 1 because we're the only character at this location. So again, for her, it's going to be the Wisdom Survival check, D8 plus 3, but this time we're shooting for a 7. She'll use a Blessing of the Gods, so 2d8 plus 3 to get a 7. And we roll a 15, so Man's Promise is defeated. That gets us another Plunder card. So it's a d6. Comes out as a 2, which is a spell. Alright, so she now needs to encounter Rahadoumi Captain as a combat 12. She's going to use her Cutlass, which gives the swashbuckling and finesse traits, so she can use her power for your check that has or is against a card that has the finesse trait. You gain the skill Melee Dexterity plus 2, which is now going to be a d10 plus 3, and the 1d6. And Jarell is going to use the Blessing of Aristil to give her 2 additional d10. So 3d10 plus a d6 plus 3. And we get a 14 plus the 3, 17, so that's enough to defeat Rahadoumi Captain, which will automatically close this location. And both Jarell and Ranzak have an opportunity to temporarily close Holy Isle, which would prevent her from escaping there. When closing, succeed at a Wisdom or Divine 7 check. So Lyrion is better suited to this. She has a d8 plus 1. Ranzak only has a d4. So he's not even going to attempt it. He's going to spend his blessing, so Lyrion will roll 2d12 plus 1. And she does temporarily close the Holy Isle, which leaves only 2 locations for the captain to escape to: the Fog Bank and the Tempest K. So we'll take 1 blessing from the blessings pile, shuffle it together with the captain, and place 1 each on those locations. And then shuffle those locations. And Jarell will reset her hand. And the effect at Cannibal Isle is no longer in play once it's closed, so she doesn't have to bury her ally. Over to Ranzak, who's still at the Holy Isle. And he encounters Detect Magic. Intelligence, Arcane, Wisdom, Divine 2. He has a d4 for intelligence. And he gets a 1, so he doesn't acquire that. He's just going to reset. Play goes to Lyrion. And she encounters another Blessing of the Gods, which she acquires immediately. We'll use to explore once more. And it's the Buccaneer. So she encounters Man's Promise now. Wisdom Survival 6 or Charisma Diplomacy 8. Well, her Wisdom is d12 plus 1. Jarell is going to spend a blessing to make that a 2d12 plus 1. And we get a total of 21 plus 1, 22, easily defeating Man's Promise. So we'll roll on the Plunder table to see what the Plunder card is going to be. It's a 3, which is another armor. That's another Plunder card under our ship. She has the ability to close the location, or at least attempt to close the location. Wisdom Divine 7. And she has a d12 plus 1. There's also only 1 card in the deck, so she's not going to add anything to it. She'll just roll a straight d12. And I guess she should have. Anyway, she gets a 5, so it doesn't get closed. She will reset her hand, and we're back to Jarell, who now needs to move again. I think she will go to the Fog Bank and encounters a Marine. Combat 8. The difficulty of the check to defeat is increased by the adventure deck number current scenario, if any, so that's a 9 combat. If the check to defeat has the swashbuckling trait, the damage dealt by the Marine is increased by 2. Okay, well, we do have the swashbuckling trait for all of our weapons. She will use her cutlass, so it will be a d10 plus a d6 plus 3. She will additionally use the Master at Arms effect. Recharge this card to add 1d4 to your melee combat, or 1d6 if you are on a ship. She is on a ship. A d10 and 2d6. Plus 3. We easily defeat the Marine. She will reset. And play goes over to Ranzak. He would not be able to make this check without a blessing, so he's just going to move over to where Jarell is. And it is an ambush. Barrier. Check to defeat. Dexterity, Acrobatics, Wisdom, Perception 9. The difficulty to defeat this barrier is increased by the adventure deck number of the current scenario, so it's actually a 10. If defeated, you may explore again. If undefeated, examine the location deck until you find a monster. Encounter it, subtracting 1 from each die rolled in your check. Banish this card and shuffle the remaining cards into the location deck. His dexterity is a d10. Lyrion will give him a blessing. The Blessing of Abadar, which is 2 dice to any check to defeat a barrier. So now he's rolling 3d10. And it's a good thing we had those 3 because there's our friend the 1. So defeated, he can explore again. And it is a spell, Inflict. Wisdom Divine 6. He cannot make that. Not without a blessing, and it's a basic card, so we could pull it from the box if we really wanted it anyway, so we'll put it back. We still have 19 blessings card in the deck, so he's not going to spend anything to explore. And it will go to Lyrion, who now encounters the last card at Holy Isle, and it is Buoyancy, Intelligence Arcane 3. She has a d6. And she only gets a 2, so she doesn't acquire that. But she now can attempt to make the close. So it's a d12 plus 1. And she gets an 11. So this is closed. On closing, you may recharge any cards that have the Divine trait in your discard pile, which works out quite nicely for her because she does have the Blessing of Abadar here, a Blessing of the Gods, a Blessing of Aristil, another Blessing of the Gods, Blessing of Pharasma. There's another Blessing of the Gods. So the Dragon Pistol and that. But she just picked up 6 cards for closing that location. Play goes back to Jarell. She encounters Aid. Wisdom Divine 6. That's a d8 for her. She only gets a 3, so she doesn't acquire. Over to Ranzak. And he encounters a Blessing of Achikek. Intelligence Craft 7. He only has a d4. This is a very good blessing to have, though. Even giving him a blessing, though, with a d4, it's pretty low odds for actually getting that, because we'd have to either get a 4 and a 3 or a 4 and a 4. So he's just going to let it go. Back to Lyrion. She is going to move over to the Tempest K. If your ship is dealt structural damage, increase the damage by 1. We will hope that it isn't dealt any damage. Obscure. Check to acquire Intelligence, Arcane, Wisdom, Divine 6. Well, her Wisdom is a d12 plus 1. And we get a 1, so we don't acquire that. I think we'll just keep bouncing back and forth here until we get the decks whittled down a bit. So Jarell encounters a Blessing of Aristil, which is a Dexterity 4 or Divine 5. So d10 plus 1 for her. And she gets a 3 plus 1, so she does get the Blessing of Aristil. And she will hold on to that. Over to Ranzak. He encounters Lookout Duty, Wisdom Perception 6. Well, he only has a d4 for Wisdom. The difficulty to defeat this barrier is increased by the adventure deck's number of the current scenario, so it's actually a 7. If defeated, you may look at the top card of the barrier's location deck. If it is a monster, you may immediately encounter it. If undefeated, your ship is dealt 1 structural damage. Leave this barrier face up on the location deck. Characters at this location encounter this barrier as their first exploration each turn. Well, it won't be bad because it's only 1 structural damage and Jarell has a power to prevent that. Jarell will give him a blessing and he will try the check. 2d4 to get a 7. And of course, they're both 1s. So this just stays here. The ship would be dealt 1 structural damage, but Jarell uses her power to prevent that from happening. Over to Lyrion. And it is an ally. Conchobar Turlock Shortstone, a gnome bard pirate. Charisma Diplomacy 7. Reveal this card to add 1d10 and the swashbuckling trait to your diplomacy check. She only has a d6 for charisma, so he's not going to be acquired. She is going to discard the Master Gunner and explore again. Discard this card to explore your location. Add the swashbuckling trait to your combat checks during this exploration. Benevolent Buckler. It's a magic shield, Constitution, Fortitude 5. That's a d6 plus 1 for her. And we get a 1, so we're not going to acquire the Benevolent Buckler. She doesn't have a way to explore again, so she'll reset. Back to Jarrell, who now has to encounter lookout duty. Difficulty, well, so it's a 7. Don't really want to spend the Blessing of Aristil on there, but she definitely needs better than a 1d8 to make this check. So 2d8 to get a 7. And it took a while to figure out that that was a 7, but it's a result of 12. So we do defeat this. If defeated, you may look at the top card of the barrier's location deck. If it is a monster, you may immediately encounter it. It is a monster. It is a marine. Check to defeat combat 8. Difficulty is increased by the adventure deck number of the current scenario, so he's actually at 9. She will use her cutlass, which allows her to now roll a d10 plus a d6 plus 3, and will recharge the eye patch for another d4. So d10, d6, d4 plus 3. We get a 15 total, so that defeats the marine. She's going to reset her hand. And Ranzak explores. And he encounters the Buccaneer. So now he will have to try to fight Man's Promise. Wisdom Survival 6, Charisma Diplomacy 8. Well, his survival is a d4 plus 3. So he can make a 6. He does have a blessing, though, so that would be 2d4 plus 3. The Blessing of Zogmagut. Discard this card to add 1 die to any check. 2d4 plus 3. That's 5 plus 3. Gets us an 8. So that is enough to defeat Man's Promise. We'll roll a d6 to see what the plunder will be. It's a 6, which means we get to choose. I think he would prefer an item. A weapon, sorry. We'll shuffle the weapons deck, add this plunder card under the ship, and now he has an attempt to close the location. Closing is recharge your hand, which must contain at least 1 card. 6 cards. When permanently closed, on closing, draw the same number of cards you recharged when closing. So 6 cards coming out. And he doesn't really have a way to do anything else, so he'll just reset. Over to Lyrion. She encounters Pirate Captain, Combat 12. Before you act, recharge a card. We will recharge the alchemical glue. The difficulty of the check to defeat is increased by the adventure deck number of the current scenario, if any. So she's actually at 13. You may not play allies that have the pirate trait on this check. After you act, the Pirate Captain deals 2 structural damage to your ship. Well, that's pretty rude. We're going to use the Dragon Pistol. We'll use the Berry effect on the Powder Horn. So d8 plus 3d6 plus 4. Which gets us a 12 plus 4 is 16. So that is enough to defeat the Pirate Captain. But now she's going to deal 2 structural damage to my ship. Okay, Ranzak is going to discard his leather armor, and Jarrell will discard her cat and nine tails to reduce that structural damage to 0, so our ship doesn't take any damage from the captain. Lyrion will reset her hand, and play goes over to Jarrell, who will move over with Lyrion. She encounters Ambrose Fishguts Croup, who is an ally. A check to acquire Charisma Diplomacy 6. Reveal this card to add 1d8 to your check to defeat a Bane that has the aquatic trait. Discard this card to explore your location. Add the swashbuckling trait to your non-combat checks during this exploration. But we can recharge the Besmaran Priest. It's going to give us another d6 to a non-combat charisma check. It's going to be a d8 and a d6 to get a 6. And we get a total of 11, so we do acquire this guy. And we will discard him to explore. Rat Swarm, Combat 8. If you do not defeat the Rat Swarm by at least 4, shuffle it into the deck it came from, the Rat Swarm still counts as defeated. So we need to get a 12. We've got the Cutlass, so d10 plus a d6. There are no blessings on the table. Lyrion's at the same location, so she can't use her ability. So d10, d6, plus 3. Well, that didn't work out so well. We get a 3 plus 3 is only 6, so we take 2 combat damage. Recharge this card to reduce combat damage dealt to you by 1 or 3 if the check has a swashbuckling trait, which it does. She's going to reset her hand, and the Rat Swarm gets shuffled into the deck because it was not defeated. Advance the Blessings deck, move Ranzak over, and he will encounter the Buccaneer. So he will go up against Man's Promise again. And we're going to need another blessing so that he can make this check. Jarrell has a blessing. He'll be rolling 2d4 plus 3 to get a 6. And we get the 6. So we get another plunder card. This time it's a 1, which is a weapon. And we have an attempt to close the location, which he's not going to be able to make. Succeed in Intelligence or Knowledge 7 check. There are no blessings on the table that would help with this, so he won't be able to close. There's only 5 cards left in the deck, though. Over to Lyrion. She encounters Cure. Wisdom Divine 6. It's a d12 plus 1 for her to acquire. And she gets a 2, so she's not acquiring the Cure. She will discard her Quartermaster to explore again. And it's the Rahadoumi Captain. So the first thing is to encounter Man's Promise. Wisdom Survival 6. She has a d12 plus 1. There are no blessings, so it's just going to be a d12 plus 1. And anything higher would have been nice, but we only get a 3. So this would deal 3 structural damage to our ship. We'll use Jarrell's ability to reduce 1 structural damage. Ranzak will discard one of his blessing potions, and Lyrion will discard her leather armor to prevent the damage to the ship. Now Lyrion encounters the Rahadoumi Captain. She's going to use her pistol plus 1 for this check, so dexterity or range skill plus 1d6 plus 1. You may additionally bury this card for another 1d10. And that is what she will do, so it'll be a d8, a d10, a d6, plus 5. And we get a 12, plus 5 is 17, which is plenty to defeat Rahadoumi Captain. And that is a win for Jarrell, Ranzak, and Lyrion in Cat and Mouse. For each plunder card, gain another random card of that type from the box and gain a Class 1 ship feat. We have 5 plunder cards. So let's bring those out. And a pretty good spread of items. So we've got 2 weapons, 1 armor, 1 spell, and 1 ally. So we get another one of each. There's another weapon. We get 1 armor. So far I'm not seeing anything great. Harpoon, maybe. Okay. Acolyte is not super useful because none of us are spellcasters. Well, Ranzak can have a spell, but he's not really a spellcaster. The longbow potentially could be good, but it requires a strength die, and none of them have a high strength. The longsword is just a basic card, which we could get anyway. The lookout is a basic, which we could get anyway. The wooden shield is a basic. The cloth armor is a basic. The falcata. Now this is an elite weapon. For your combat check, reveal this card to use your strength or melee skill plus 2d4. You may additionally discard this card to add another 2d4. Not really good because we're not strength based. And the harpoon, this is a decent one. Maybe Ranzak will end up picking up the harpoon. Then for the spells we have Frostbite. For your combat check to defeat a monster, display this card and use your Arcane or Divine skill plus 1d6, while display damage dealt to a monster is reduced by 1. Well, not really good, because none of us have Arcane or Divine. Holy Stone. For your combat check, discard this card to use your Wisdom, Divine, or Ranged skill plus 1d6 plus 1. So the only one that could use that is Lyrion, and she doesn't really care for it. So no, we didn't really acquire anything, did we? Other than that, Class 1 ship feat. And maybe this card will go down to Ranzak. We'll have to see. Well, that is the end of this particular scenario, and again, we were successful. Jarell, Ranzak, and Lyrion taking on Rahadoumi Captain and her ship, Man's Promise. Tune in next week when we will move on to the third scenario in the Wormwood Mutiny, which is the Wreck of the Infernus. Thanks for watching this playthrough. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video if you did, and I will talk to you next time.